Pastor's Heart. I'm Dominic Steele, and thanks for joining us today. The Gender Revolution with Patricia and Kamal Weerakoon and Rob Smith. How do we put together the terms biological sex, gender behaviours or expressions, sexual orientation and gendered identity? What do each of those terms mean and how do they relate? We want to treat with love and compassion those who struggle with gender incongruence or gender dysphoria and other similar concerns, and at the same time we want to avoid being intimidated, silenced or demoralised by pressure from activists, lobby groups and others who are trying to impose a transgender ideology on everyone. Rob Smith, along with Patricia and Kamal Weerakoon, have just published this book, The Gender Revolution, attempting to chart a way forward for a biblical, biological and compassionate response. Rob has just completed his PhD in biblical gender studies. Patricia has been a sexologist for a long time, and she was the graduate program in Sexual Health director at the University of Sydney, has published a stack of books, and Kamal is a Presbyterian minister with a master's thesis in this area. Let's start with the pastor's heart, because while there is a clash of ideologies, there are real people and real stories who we love and care for, and you have been engaged with many of them over a long time.
Dominic, the thing that I really remember about this is from a long time ago, how it has changed. A couple of years ago, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I was seeing men who would say, I want to be a woman, grown men. Mm-hmm. I would talk to what we call trans widows. That is the wife who would come and say, my husband wants to change. What does that make me?
I remember talking to you about someone like that.
Yeah.
2010 or something.
Yeah. So we're talking that was what we were seeing, what I was seeing. However, now, over the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of talks for parents and in schools. And what I'm seeing is every talk I do for parents, invariably there will be very distressed parents who either come to me after, but most often would either call or email me to say, I have a child, sometimes just out of primary school, who feels uncomfortable in their body, or a teenager, almost always a girl, who says, I am a boy. And then when I go to the schools, once I've done a talk, I would have girls, mostly girls, coming up to me and saying, either I'm not comfortable in my body and I feel like I'm non-binary or, agender or one of the many 72 or so categories. Otherwise, what they would come and say is, you should not be talking about biology being the basis, because that is not. Mm-hmm. So there is this activism also that I'm seeing. And it's so sad because these are young brains, young minds.
Rob, your pastor's heart in this space.
Well, like Patricia, I'm constantly coming into contact with, often being contacted by, parents of teenagers or young adults, but sometimes by people themselves who are battling directly with these things, and other times spouses or siblings, and of course lots of pastors, lots of schools are reaching out saying, can you help us, can you guide us, can you give us insight into what's happening in the culture, but also what's happening for individuals and for people. So again, this is where it's helpful to distinguish the ideology that's out there and doing a lot of damage, and then many people who are casualties of that ideology, and who need a lot of care and just gentle engagement. So, one of the things we've tried to do in the book is, again, make clear that we're not attacking people, but attacking ideas in order to love people.
Biblical, biological and compassionate. It's those three poles, really. Yeah. Kamal, let's go to you. And the structure of the book, there's this dominant metaphor, and we'll put it up on the screen, this tree. Now, perhaps we've got it on the screen here. Actually, people are listening to us as well as watching us. I wonder whether or not you could, just for those listening, describe what's going on with this metaphor of the tree.
Yeah, sure. What we want to do with this metaphor is ground our understanding of ourselves in all of our complexity and diversity, in our biology, in the body that we as Christians from the Bible believe that God Himself has gifted us with, and also that science has patterned, has mapped through its wonderful investigations for hundreds of years. That's the biblical and biological element. So the root system of this tree is our development in our mother's womb, where so much of our future development is like constituted.
So everything below ground in the metaphor is pre-birth.
Everything is below ground is pre-birth. Then you have the trunk and the branches. And as we continue to grow, our sexed body, like a male or female, which is both a biblical thing, both a biblical fact that God created humanity, male and female, Genesis 1 and 2, and intended us to enjoy that sense of growing up and being a man or a woman. Song of Songs, Jesus as a man, and so on and so on. But there's so much more as well. There is our sexual attraction. There is our sense of ourselves.
We'll get to all of that in a moment, but let's just go back to underground. And I want to drill down both scientifically underground and biblically underground. And so, Patricia, let's start with the biology and the science underground. What are you, as a sexologist who's spent a zillion years
a zillion, that's true. That is the most fascinating thing, Dominic. I'm sorry, I am a biologist, and it just so excites me when I think about that. Because our sex as male or female is determined at that moment when sperm and ovum come together, because the sperm carries either what we call an X chromosome or a Y, and that Y is an amazing little thing, because that, when it meets with the ovum, immediately determines that XY is going to be a male. See, right from that moment, that determination of male or female. Then, while in the womb, in the presence of the Y, you get a testes and male, what we call genitalia. That's all the structures that go with it. Now, all this is only confirmed when the baby is born. So it's all happened in the womb. And once, when the baby is born, it's only confirmed. Now, that is opposed by the ideologists. Because what transgender ideology says is that biology doesn't matter, that sex has been somehow assigned at birth. So it's like the doctor and the parents decided you were a boy or a girl, and then only you know. And this is being taught to very young children.
There is muddled in there disorders of sex development. Do you just want to unpack that for us? Yeah.
Yes. Now, there's a clear male, so XY male genitals inside our external, internal. And if no Y chromosome, I'm simplifying it, it's kind of complex, but all the female genitals, internal, external. Now, in about 0.018, and that's very rare, this clear male female.
0.018% is
percent.
Yeah.
0.018%. That's rare.
1 in 10,000, or?
I think it's 1 in about 6,600 or something like that. But rare. There's that clear male-female development is disrupted.
Yeah.
And so you have disorders of sex development where the baby may be born with genitalia that isn't clearly male or female.
Right.
Like a large clitoris, a tiny penis.
Right.
Now, that's a disorder of sex development. Unfortunately, it's given the term intersex. Now, even you listen to that word, intersex, kind of says like there's male, female, and something third.
Or there's a continuum.
Or there is something in between, both of which are wrong. But this again comes down to what the ideologists say, that there is no binary sex, there is male and female, but there's all these things in between.
But scientifically, you're wanting to say there's binary sex and disorder.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. well, you're the PhD in the medical. We'll go to the PhD in the Bible on this. Rob, how does this fit in with the scriptures?
Well, one of the things we've sought to illustrate and demonstrate in the book is that science and scripture are singing the same song.
Right.
The Bible and biology are, telling the same story, that God has made us in the beginning male and female, and that's not just something that was once and now it's a whole different story. That's a continuing reality. As Jesus says in Matthew 19, this is not only in the beginning but from the beginning. God makes us male and female. Now, of course, the Bible also acknowledges, yes, there are disorders of all kinds because of the entrance of sin into the world, and disorders of sex development is one type of physiological disorder that some human beings have to contend with. And there's a biblical category, at least, that covers at least a certain subsection of these disorders in the form of the eunuch. And so again, in Bible times, yes, they were aware that sometimes things do go wrong in terms of sex development. But none of that disrupts the reality of the binary pattern. There's still only two sexes from a biblical point of view. So eunuchs, for example, are a subset of male, just a non-reproductive male, but still nonetheless fit on the male side of the binary.
Then you've got these other terms, biological sex. Well, we've got biological sex coming from the ground, underground, and then you've got sexual orientation, gender expression, and gender identity. We'll drill down to them in a moment, but why don't you, Patricia, you just give us the headline, the one sentence on each of those?
Okay. Okay. Gender expression is how we live out our sex. So a male lives out what we would say masculine behavior. A woman, a girl, lives out what we would say feminine behavior. That's just a one sentence on that. It's incredibly more complex than that because there is variation.
We'll ask you that in a moment. Yep.
Okay, so that's gender expression. Sexual orientation is whom am I sexually attracted to and wish to have sex with. Now that attraction, by definition, is to the biological sex of the other. So a woman who's biologically an adult female attracted to another woman is called a lesbian. So that is the category of orientation. Now, those two, behavior can be observed and measured, social sciences. Sexual orientation, we have sufficient research and laboratory analysis in a way that we can actually test in a laboratory whom you're sexually attracted to. So they can be measured. Now, when we come to gender identity, it is something we cannot measure. There is no empirical test for what you feel you are, because that's what gender identity is, an inner feeling of who you are, your kind of authentic self. The ideologists would even talk of a gendered soul that says who you are. Can't be measured. There is no evidence of a male brain in a female body. There is just no way of knowing. It's only the person's self-declared identity, that disjunction between feeling and biological reality.
So we've got this diagram up on the screen, and well, Kamal, let's come back to you and the overlapping circles of sexual orientation, gender expression, and gender identity, but all flowing from the below ground. Do you want to just unpack that for us? Yeah.
So both biblically and, I would say, according to science, there is a wonderful harmony, an intended pattern in the way that our bodies develop and that God intended, even our feelings and our orientation and our way of life, the way that we conduct ourselves as men or women, as masculine or feminine, the way that there is a harmony, an integrity to that. Now, it doesn't always work. So the overlapping circles are there, but I mean, the reason we're writing the book is that we acknowledge that there's not everyone who is biologically a man and who identifies as a man is sexually oriented to women, as in they don't always want to have sex with women. It's a different category. It's not what God intended.
Patricia, what has caused this change that you were talking about, from when you started your studies, most of the people you were dealing with who were suffering gender incongruence were middle-aged men, and now it's so frequently young women. What's going? There's something going on in society. Yeah.
It's complex in some ways, but kind of simple in others, because when we first started studying, and I'm talking the late 1970s and 80s, when we were seeing the men, it was like men who were distressed but recognized they are men. Mm-hmm. And so it was there was a gatekeeping also that was there for them to establish that they actually were distressed. See a psychologist, live as a woman for so many years before they even started hormones. Mm-hmm. Now, what we are seeing is this dramatic change of children and young people who have been influenced by a number of things. And there's so many different theories out there. The first thing is it biological? Because a lot of gender ideology would say it is an immutable characteristic, this feeling of who I am. So my feelings then take precedence over my biology because this is the immutable thing.
So let's just do that on the screen. And so on the gender tree picture, the roots stop being significant.
Correct. And
the leaves and the branches, which is gender identity, becomes the defining thing about me. Mm-hmm. And so you're saying that it's really coming from my individualism, really. Is that right or no? If I'm putting your words into your mouth, I think
it's
I'll wind
individualism is, I think we've all read a lot of Carl Trueman here. So, and probably Rob, you probably can deal with this better in terms of the individualism.
Yeah.
Well, that's certainly part of it. Again, it's multifactorial and so on. But yeah, what we're witnessing, again, and the book describes this well, I don't know if it was Patricia or Kamal's insight, but
one of the other ones.
An overturning of the tree, or at least an unrooting of the tree and then a flipping of the tree, so that the roots cease to be driving what ought to be. You know, again, the way it's meant to function is that our biology is then meant to, as it were, guide our gender identity, our gender expression, our sexual orientation, but all that's been turned upside down, and that's part of the chaos we're dealing with. And yes, certainly expressive individualism is in the mix, but a whole lot of things just alongside that. And I guess moving away from a biblical understanding of the world and a biblical understanding of humanity, even a rejection of science in some quarters is part of it as well, a rejection of objectivity. So there's a number of forces and factors that have produced this rise of the subjective, becoming the all-determining factor.
Especially, I think, in girls. The recent theories that are being given is that couple of things. One is social media. Mm-hmm. It's largely driven by social media. And this is the teenagers of today, the anxious generation. A direct correlation between social media use and anxiety in girls. And so they're watching TikTok and Instagram, and it's glorifying transgender. It's frightening to watch some of those videos that glorify, like, basically double mastectomies in girls, and that it's something beautiful. And girls are getting caught up in that. That's one area of research. Another area of research is that girls are actually fleeing being female. Because being female now, especially in this highly pornified culture, isn't a very nice thing to be a girl these days. So they want to get away from being these sex objects. So there is this combination of what society has laid on many of our young girls. And of course it's tied up with correlation with autism and depression and anxiety and even trauma in childhood.
There is a correlation there, isn't there?
Yeah. A lot of research there.
And sadly, what happens is that medicine gets over-promised, that the changes that drugs and surgery can do, young people they believe that they can really manufacture, as it were, if I can use that language, they can manufacture a new self. Look, I've been involved in youth and young adults ministry. I love the way that young people are developing their identity. It's fun to literally watch them grow, in teen years. I want them to have a good, solid, healthy sense of themselves and love their body and grow up to be strong, competent, healthy young people. They're becoming sucked in, they're getting fooled by this over-promising of a new self overnight, as it were.
And this is where there's a parallel thing happening to the girls with teenage boys, particularly those who live online, who are perhaps even addicted to gaming and creating avatars, sometimes female avatars of themselves online, and particularly, again, if they're somewhere on the autism spectrum, adolescence can be very, very alarming for them and discomforting for them. And so again, there's a parallel set of forces playing in on teenage boys that are producing not the great numbers we're seeing in the teenage girls, but a significant cohort. Similar, people who are getting derailed in the process of their adolescent development.
I'm just looking at the tree here, and if we've taken our eyes off the ground and the root and biological sex, and the big focus is on gender identity, then I think you're saying, I pick my gender identity, and then gender expression will flow from that, sexual orientation will flow from that, and even biological sex will flow from that. Let's explore each of those in turn. Let's talk about how gender identity leads to a particular gender expression. Perhaps we start with you, Patricia.
Okay. The research now is very clear that there is a variation in how people express their masculinity or femininity. And there's research that shows that
some boys like playing rugby, some boys like going to the library.
That's right. Yeah. And doing ballet, So when you draw like behavior, male and female, there's this kind of bell chart. And so you find about 30% of overlap between male-female behavior. And when you look at the tail ends, and this is really interesting, there will be some girls who are actually more masculine. We are talking stereotypes here. More masculine than the majority of the boys. And there will be some boys who are actually more feminine than the majority of the girls. Now we're talking stereotypes. So when I was growing up, I was a very masculine boy. I was a tomboy, and everybody accepted that. No wonder I grew up to be a sexologist. But when I was growing up, I would say, I want to be a boy because I watched my brothers, and they were having fun, and I was cooking and cleaning. So I thought, I want to be a boy. And I would go and say, my mother, I want to be a boy. But then I reached puberty, and it was nice being a girl. And that is what research is showing us, that children who say, I don't want to be what biologically I am and I am the other, if we leave them to live in their own skin, then they will accept who they are at puberty or soon after. There too the research is clear. Now what gender ideology is doing here is actually going back to stereotypes.
That is surprising, isn't it? Do you just want to unpack that for us, Rob?
Yeah, well, it's one of the reasons there's a war going on between sort of traditional feminists or second-wave feminists and transgender or gender-affirming feminists. Because, again, the whole transgender movement is really, reintroducing very narrow, rigid gender stereotypes. So, for example, there's a famous book on gender by the guy who I think invented the genderbread person, if you're familiar with that image. But in his book he says, I know that my soul is feminine because, you ready? I like dark chocolate, red wine, and rom-coms. Right?
But I like dark chocolate, red wine, and rom-coms.
Well, and this is why the feminists are saying, we've been trying to destroy these silly, shallow, infantile stereotypes for 70 years, and now all of a sudden they're back with a vengeance. And children are being taught, if you like certain things or don't like certain things, that is determining your sex effectively. And so here's where the radical end.
Sex, yeah.
Well, the radical end of transgender ideology says that your gender identity doesn't just determine your gender, actually determines your sex, which is why there's now a move not to need to change your body. You just simply declare that I'm a woman, I don't have to do anything to my body. It can still be what we would think of as a male body, but it's now a female body because my gender identity is female. So that's, again, the radical end of transgender identity. It's a denial of the relevance of sex. So again, this is turning the tree upside down.
In the Bible itself has a wonderful variety of how men and women behave. So King David, he was a man and he went out to war and he sang songs. And then there's famously Jael and Deborah who went to war. So as pastors, let's not be ashamed of the ways that our men and women we behave, some of which we have inherited from perhaps our culture. That's not always wrong, because cultural ways of living as men and women, they've developed over time, they've developed because of something good that's seeking to advance. But let's not be too stringent. There's more variety that we can allow.
I think what you're saying is also that just, of course, the culture might be saying boys play rugby or girls do this, girls go to ballet. But as a pastor, I don't need to say that.
Exactly.
And that's actually outside my field, and I want to celebrate the broad range of expressions of fun things that people want to do.
Yeah, so this is where children are being hurt, because here's a boy, for example, who doesn't like playing rugby and doesn't turn every stick into a gun, who's being told there's something wrong with him, or in fact that he's really a girl. And that's why he doesn't like these things, which is just ludicrous.
But you want to broaden the definition of boy to what it actually is in the scriptures. Yeah.
He's a boy because he's got a male body. Whether he likes rugby or doesn't is irrelevant to being a boy.
Yeah.
Some boys do, some boys do. It's just
for the record,
opening
I
up.
don't like rugby.
Well, we can have wonderful young men who are Christians and who do art, and who then just do that art because they love art and they want people to love God through their art, or for the love of art, or whatever. For example, we can have young women who are strong and become athletes and win the gold medal, and it's fantastic.
Let's talk gender identity flowing out to sexual orientation, Patricia.
Yeah, as a sexologist and when I was director, I had so many friends who were gay and lesbian and some bisexual. But the reality is, at that time, as we already talked about, it's the attraction to the biological body of the same sex, or both sexes, but let's go same sex. In gender ideology, what is being said to people of same-sex attraction is that your attraction must be to the gender of the other person. So like Rob was saying, a man, stay with me here because it gets very interestingly complicated, a man who just says I am a woman, a fully biological man, must now be allowed into lesbian spaces, and a lesbian who is a biological woman attracted to another biological woman should be willing to have sex with him because he calls himself a woman. If she doesn't, then she is a bigot and a transphobe. This is what ideology has done to sexual orientation. And
how's that argument flown?
Well, in other words, the T is eating up the LGB.
That's right.
Yeah.
And again, what's key?
But what happens there? What happens when the T says that to the...
It's splitting the LGB. There's a major war going on right now.
Yeah.
Right.
And the key point is that the person's declared self-identity trumps their biology. That's the key.
That's and really, actually, you can't have both.
Yeah.
You've got to go one way or the other. And you're saying that actually science and the Bible say it comes from the ground up.
Biology matters, bodies matter.
Yeah.
And so again, the norm in terms of the divinely intended pattern is that all these other things follow from our biology. So your gender identity is designed to align with your biology. Your gender expression, therefore, needs to be broadly congruent with that. Again, with all the room to breathe and variation we just talked about. And again, your sexual expression likewise should be congruent with that, which is why the Bible's sexual ethics are grounded as they are in biology. It's sinful for a male to have sex with a male or for a female to have sex with a female. This is not God's pattern. And so it's the body that matters. It's the biology that matters. You see it in Genesis 1, the first thing we're told about humanity, male and female. Genesis 2, it's the body of the man that's made first. It's the male that becomes the man, the female that becomes the woman, Genesis 1 and 2. So the Bible is just very straightforward in that sense, that sex and gender and then sexual expression are meant to line up that way.
Okay, if we take what you say is right, what does that mean for our pastoral practice, Rob?
Well, it means we need to, on the one hand, recognise how God made things to be, how God desires things to be, but also the fact that sin has now made everything complicated. So as we've said already, some people don't experience attraction to the opposite sex, but to the same sex. Some people are not comfortable with the sex of their body, but feel at odds with that. And so we need to recognise those realities that sin has brought into the world and, well, seek to help people who are wrestling on those particular fronts, and we're all wrestling on multiple fronts, but help those wrestling on those particular fronts to see the goodness of God's word, the goodness of God's will, and to, well, begin that journey of acceptance. So again, the person who's wrestling with their gender identity, recognise the goodness of their body and allow that body, as it were, to tell them the truth about themselves. And to begin to embrace their sex and align their gender identity and expression with that sex.
And we say this in the name of the Jesus who is a body. The Word became flesh. He became a body. And so, and that body was torn. Now, it wasn't gender dysphoria, etc. But Jesus knows what it is to have his body hurt. And he is now risen, and he trusts, he promises those who put their trust in him a new body, free of every pain, free of every disfiguration. So if we put our trust in Jesus, we have nothing to lose. We have everything to gain.
So Rob, you have spoken with and helped people who have been navigating gender incongruence and gender dysphoria, who have come to Christ and who have understood Jesus Christ and walked with him.
Yeah.
You want to just talk about some of the pastoral journeys you've been on with people?
Yes, certainly a number of people who, for some, they've had a lifelong battle with gender incongruence. And prior to becoming a Christian, if I think of one friend, had transitioned to living as the opposite sex, and then after becoming a Christian, recognised that no, God had made them a particular sex and that they needed to return to living faithfully in accordance with that sex. And so just seeing the wonderful journey that many people have undergone as they've, again, rediscovered the goodness of God's gift and lamented decisions that perhaps they've made in rejection of that gift, that some of which, of course, can't be reversed or undone because, again, people have taken medical and surgical steps. Rarely can those be reversed. And so there's sadness there for many. But again, without going into personal details of some of these dear brothers and sisters, just their journey back. We talk about detransitioners today, and that's not a bad word. But these are Christian people who are reclaiming their God-given sex and seeking to re-embrace that and live to God's glory through that.
Thanks so much for coming and talking to us. My guests on The Pastor's Heart, Rob Smith and Kamal and Patricia Weerakoon. The book is The Gender Revolution, a biblical, biological and compassionate response. And just a little heads up, Rob and I both served together on the Sydney Anglican Ministry, livingfaith.online. You can check it out. It is a Christian ministry of the Sydney Anglican Church, aiming to love and serve those in our churches who are wrestling with gender incongruence or experiencing same-sex attraction. Thanks for joining us on The Pastor's Heart, and we will look forward to your company next Tuesday afternoon.